All right. Welcome to Wrestling with Reconciliation. Thank you all for coming. We're excited about our session this week on immigration, but Zoom etiquette. We talk about this when we meet, that we want to keep yourselves on mute when you're not talking, just to avoid some of the background noises, and that we'll invite folks to speak and open when we have the open dialogue. Chat box becomes a good place to begin to feed questions, and you can raise your hand. We have some people that will put their little hand in the corner. I would say raise it so we can actually see you and catch the differentiation. But remember that we're on video, and so use your video when you can. We'd love to see people's faces and engage together. And we use the chat box as a question and answer time, but we don't use it as a chance to debate. We try not to be in kind of offline debates in chat while we're listening and engaging. So stay at the table or stay on the Zoom call is our last principle. We have these commitments that we want to be lifelong learners, and we want to become more and more increasingly uncomfortable with being uncomfortable. It's okay to disagree, and it's okay to engage with, but we don't want to shut people down or cut them off. We want to use I statements. We want to own our truth, but not assign truth to others. We want to take a listening posture. I love the idea of seeking to understand before being understood. Share community, not expertise. We don't have to be all brilliant. Mistakes, disagreements, things are going to happen, and we want to commit to relational grace. We want you to engage. We don't want you to hesitate. So don't worry about being awkward or wrong. Let's keep the engagement going. And we don't shame, we don't blame. We try not to have oh, you said that, I'm cutting you off. And we actually want to be the people that say, hey, if you hear somebody retreating, we want to invite them back into the conversation as much as we can. Mm-hmm. And then be prayerful and be attentive to God's Spirit at work. And really let's listen to each other, and let's listen to the Holy Spirit. And those are the key things that we look at when we think about wrestling with reconciliation. So let me open us in prayer. Father God, we just invite you to this Zoom call with us, God. Give us attention to your Spirit. Let us be good listeners. Let us engage with one another. And overall, God, we ask that you would be glorified in this time as we wrestle together and really think about what is true reconciliation in your kingdom look like here on earth, God, as it is in heaven. In Jesus' name, amen. Back to you, Pastor.
Again, thank you again for being with us tonight. I'm excited to introduce our guest, Sergio Chavez. He and I met when I was doing a small project over with Bellevue Presbyterian. I should be a little formal, and find Sergio to be a very dynamic, conscientious, and believer in Jesus. So I'm glad to have him. He is currently the cultural diversity advocate at Bellevue Presbyterian Church, and in his role, he helps the organization grow in multicultural competency, as Bell Pres is a multicultural and multi-generational church community. Sergio has been involved in ministry some form or another, since his days as a youth leader in high school. And he served as an AV director, communications director, and a lay pastor for a small congregation. Along with serving in roles of leadership and management, Sergio also has been given the opportunity to preach, utilizing the blessings of lived experiences as an immigrant Christian growing up in Seattle. I've had him preach for us at Emerald City, and our people would like to have him come back. So we'll have to get that lined up, Sergio. Sergio was born in Mexico. His family immigrated to the U.S. when he was only 2 years old, and the Lord has blessed Sergio and his wife, Lauren, with 3 beautiful daughters and family in the Seattle area. So Sergio's desire is to serve the Lord and to help the kingdom reflect a diverse community described in Revelation 7:9 through 17. Welcome, Sergio. Glad to have you with us again tonight.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Pastor Avery Drake. And hello, welcome, everyone. Good to see your faces. I think I don't know if I'd met any of you before, but maybe I have. And if I have and I've forgotten, excuse me, sorry, but I meet a lot of people, so my brain doesn't keep everything. So to talk about this, when Pastor Avery Drake asked me about this, like, what's your view on immigration? I'm like, how much time do you got? So I know I'm short on time and I won't be able to cover everything. So I'm really kind of try to narrow my focus down into what I think where the church kind of needs to step in, or where much of the conversation I've heard around immigration when it comes to the church. So first and foremost, there's so much scripture about immigration. They just call it, he went to Egypt. They went to, Capernaum. They went to this. They went to they immigrated is not the word that was used then, but that's the word we use today. But I wanted to narrow it down to Leviticus 19:33 through 37. And this is where there's all this, like how you were supposed to be, how you're supposed to follow me. God is for the Israelites, for all of you theologians there, you might know what all that is, but it ends with this part talking about the sojourner, or the quote unquote immigrant. It says, when a stranger sojourns with you in your land, and you shall not do him wrong. It says, you shall treat the stranger who sojourns with you as a native among you, and you shall love him as yourself. For you were strangers in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. You shall do no wrong in judgment, in measures of length or weight or quantity. You shall have just balances, just weights, and just ephah, and a just hin. And those are just types of measurements. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, and you shall observe all my statutes as my rules and do them. I am the Lord.
Mhm.
So not only is it you should treat the foreigner or the sojourner who's coming by as yourself, as a native. It didn't say because they're Jew, it didn't say because they look like you, it didn't say because we're the same religion. They were just traveling. So to treat them. And then on top of that, because it's ending this whole thing, it's like, and you should be just with the things that you do. And really talking about commerce there. So I want to give you guys my personal backstory just so I can frame my perspective on why I'm presenting some of these things. So as Pastor Harvey Drake said, yeah, I came here when I was 2, but I was brought here when I was 2, obviously. And I was brought illegally while I was 2. So my family first came to the United States of America as illegal immigrants from Mexico. And we went, my parents did everything they could to get into the process as quick as they can. And we did, and, spent money for years, really 6 years. And it wasn't until the 1986 Reagan administration passed the Immigration Reform and Control Act, for some of you who maybe were alive at that time, where he granted certain permissions to people to get permanent residency. And my family was one of the first people to get residency here in Seattle area. So my very, very young upbringing was a time of being an illegal immigrant and being afraid of deportation and, all the things that come while being an illegal immigrant, but then eventually getting residency that I hold till this day. So my approach to immigration really is it's a personal one, but it's also like a pastoral one. Because since I've grown up in Beacon Hill, there's a lot of diverse people there, a lot of different immigrants there, not just obviously back in the 80s, Beacon Hill was 80% Asian. So I grew up around a lot of Koreans, Chinese, and Japanese. There wasn't a lot of Latinos. I think my family made up the 1% in the Beacon Hill area there where we lived. So I grew up around a lot of people, but always grew up in the church as well. So when I hear now today, when the church faces immigration and they're like, what should we do about immigration? Well, the term immigration is so broad and it's so nuanced. It's similar to systemic racism. Like, what do you actually mean? What are you talking about when you talk about immigration in the US? Because there's a lot of assumptions and a lot of biases involved. And many of them are like half truths and like wives' tales, like either information that's fairly old that is no longer relevant today, or just misconceptions in general. So even a little bit of education can really help us clear up some of our preconceived ideas. So I just wanted to give you guys just a few statistics from a Pew review that was from August 20th, 2020. And I can also send this to you. I don't know if I can put it in the chat or something like that, just to kind of give us a framework of the large picture of immigration. And I can't share everything, so just a few things. So most immigrants in the US, 77% of them are here legally. So 77% of all immigrants, right, from every country that comes to America, they are legal immigrants. So that leaves that 33% that are not. In 1990 to 2007, the unauthorized immigration population more than tripled in size from 3.5 million to a recorded high of 12.2 million in 2007. And Mexico is the top origin of country of U.S. immigrant population. 2018, roughly 11.2 million, accounting for 25% of those. But the next largest groups are from China, 6%, India, 6%, the Philippines, 4%, and El Salvador, 3%. And some of the things that that I see or I hear about immigration, when people say, what should we do about immigration? You know, immigration's a problem. Like, which immigration are you talking about? Are you talking about people coming from Germany? Are you talking about people coming from Ukraine? Are you talking about people coming from Africa? Are you talking people coming from Canada? Are you talking about people coming from south of the border? Because usually when I'm asked that, given my face, that's really what they're talking about, because that's a very different topic, right? You're not concerned about people from the Netherlands trying to get into the country and paying their way to get here, or potentially coming here legally. I don't know if that is even a thing, but most likely people are focused on the south of the border because that's what's been in politics, and that's what we see a lot on the news. Well, part of that, I want to speak into that alone, as Mexico being the largest sector of the immigrants in the U.S. Why is that a little bit? So I have my theories, and I can give you some facts or some statistics about it, of why I believe that is. But obviously, they're the closest to us. So there's the history of Mexico and America and how many Mexicans stayed in the U.S. when it bought the land, or quote unquote bought the land from Mexico. And so there was that tie of there were some of us who were already here, like you guys didn't decide to call it Arizona and California, California, Arizona, like there's a reason why their names are there. So there's that tie of there was always going to be this immigration, and before the border was established, there was always this migration of immigrants there. But then what continued, what boomed Mexicans to come into America was the boom of America, the Industrial Revolution, the economics that happened, or the economy that happened in the U.S. attracted them. But in the past 40 years, essentially since 1990, there was a huge climb in those. And really, when we talk about immigrants coming from Mexico, my proposal is that it is a failed economic system. It is a system that benefits and both countries, and there's somewhat almost a reason not to fix it. So America gets cheap labor from Mexican immigrants because they're undocumented. If they're undocumented, even when they are documented, they get lower cost in labor. And then Mexico, on the other hand, all those immigrants that come over to Mexico, they send all that money back to Mexico. So there's like billions of dollars that go back to Mexico. So on the American side, they're getting cheap labor. We're all benefiting from this cheap labor, right? Our apples should cost like $12 were we all doing it, but all these immigrants are doing it for a lot less. So we benefit from it. And then Mexico, who's basically doesn't have to do anything, is getting that money back into their economy. So in order to solve that problem would make a very huge economic shift. And in order to try to, another thing, in order to try to help that, if you know about NAFTA, the North American Trade Agreement that happened in the 90s, well, it was supposed to try to help the economic boom and strengthen the economy in Canada, America, or US, America, and Mexico. But it did pretty much the opposite. So I just want to, if you don't know what NAFTA is, you can look that up, but it was basically how can we trade freely between these three countries without all the kind of, I don't know what they're called, the embargo taxes and all that kind of stuff, but let's just kind of, let's work together. Well, let me read you this kind of small paragraph from this entire article about the effects of NAFTA. It says, the North American Free Trade Agreement was sold to the people of all three countries in grand promises. Mexicans were promised NAFTA would raise their wages and bring Mexican standards of living closer to the United States and Canada. Instead, after 24 years, real wages in Mexico are down from already low pre-NAFTA wages. 2 million Mexicans engaged in farming lost their livelihoods and lands. Tens of thousands of small businesses have gone bankrupt as American big box retailers moved in, and poverty remains widespread. And Mexican taxpayers have paid foreign investors more than $204 million in compensation following investor state dispute settlements and attacks. And what we don't hear as well as from my family who's in Mexico, not only that, but the Mexican government started giving away indigenous land that was promised and held for indigenous people of Mexico pre, Spanish colonization. And because they have the power and they wanted to make more money, they also sold some of those lands away from indigenous people in order for some American companies to come in. So this free trade agreement killed the economy in a lot of places. People who had no desire to come to America, they couldn't uphold their farms anymore. They couldn't keep their businesses anymore. They lost their businesses. I watched this one testimony of a gentleman who I think he had a strawberry farm, or I can't remember, but his family had been farming for decades and decades. He couldn't produce enough on his farm to compete with subsidized fruits and vegetables or farms from America. So he would pick his crops, sell as much as he could, immigrate to America to then pick crops in America to raise enough money to keep his farm, send it back to Mexico, go back to Mexico, try to keep his farm, and he would keep on doing that. At the time when I saw his testimony, I don't know if he ever survived all that, but that is what happened. It's an economic system that is broken, just like so many systems, right? There's no perfect system. So there's problems there. And I'm not an economist, but I grew up in poverty, but what are some of the basic rules of poverty? Poverty breeds desperation and a culture that's easy to prey on. So enter the criminal organizations, right, that have more than like nobody to oppose them and take advantage of its own people. That's why when we see these drug crops try to get destroyed in some of these South American countries where they try to burn the crops, the workers run out and try to put out the fire in order to keep these coca leaves, alive, because that's the only work that they have. These criminal organizations are the only ones that are hiring them because their economy's shot. So poverty breeds these organizations. So in the last decade, or the last 2 decades, really, the criminal organizations and crime in Mexico has skyrocketed, giving people even more reasons to leave. And I mean, skyrocketed. So like there's so many states that are what we consider insecure. So investors won't invest in Mexico because they can't secure organizations there because of so many criminal activity. They've gone up in kidnappings, all these type of things. I mean, all the things, El Chapo, all the stuff you see on Netflix, like that's no joke. That's what's happening. And people don't have the economic power and the government behind them to help them. So it's really just declined quite a bit of things in Mexico, which then there's America. We're the shining light, the golden, the golden goose, the American dream. So you have your choice of poor economy, crime, poverty, can't make it, or the idea of like, maybe I can find a better life elsewhere. So back to immigration in the US. So by race, and so that's just Mexico. So by race and ethnicity, now the misconception as well that I hear about with the church is that when we think about immigration problems, or I should say my experience has been, we think brown people, we think Mexicans, we think South Americans, we think that, that's the problem. But that has changed in recent times. By race and ethnicity, more Asian immigrants than Hispanic immigrants have arrived in the US in most years since 2009. Immigration from Latin America slowed following the Great Recession, which was back in 2008, particularly from Mexico, which has been seen both decreasing flows into the United States and large flows back into Mexico in recent years. And then there's the refugees, right? They're immigrants too. The largest group of refugees come from Congo, from Africa, and then followed by Burma, Myanmar, Ukraine, Eritrea, and Afghanistan. And among all refugees, admitted in at least at this time, 2019, when from this statistics, 4,900 were Muslims, but that's 60%, and 23,800 are Christians, 79%. So what I just gave you was all the politics behind immigration. Now I want to give you what it means to Christianity. In 2009, 23,800 immigrants came into this country who were Christians. How many churches do you think would love to house those 23,800 Christians? So immigration and Christianity. I can give you this link too, but there was a presentation given in the Library of Congress, I think in 2014, talking about how immigration is reshaping Christianity in the world. So just a few statistics from them. World Christianity has gone through seriously radical changes since the new millennium, the 21st century. The center of gravity for Christianity used to be Europe. That's we got the after Constantine and everything in Europe, and that's where it all came from. Well, that used to be the center of Christianity. It is no longer the center of gravity, or the center of the world. It has moved to Africa. Africa now is the center of Christianity, and that's all due to immigration, right? In 2014, when this was presented, 1 out of 4 Christians were African. Let me say that again. 1 out of 4 Christians were African in the world. Now, we may not see that here, but in the world, that is, at least according to this study, according to the research that these cats did, that's what it was. Latin and Africa hold 1 billion of the world's Christians. And another statistic they gave, again, this is 2014, so maybe it's different now, but at that time, there's also the boom of Christianity in China. And in 2014, it was argued by them that on any given Sunday, there are more people in China in churches than there are in the US. So I'm going to repeat that. On any given Sunday, there's more people in churches in China than there are in the US. So why is that important? Well, 80% of the Latinos who are coming into the US America are Catholics. And it is reshaping Catholicism in the US because they accept him as obviously as being Catholics. So that has revitalized the Catholic Church in the US. We all, well, maybe we don't know, but if you don't know, the decline in Christianity in the US has been grave, has been falling for years and years and years. Who is rebuilding Christianity in America? Immigrants from Africa, from Latin America, and from Asia. And not only that, the charismatic movement has been a boom, right? From Africa, a lot of Pentecostalism, a lot of charismatic churches, as well as from Latin America and in Korea. And so this charismatic movement has also been backed up by these immigrants. So the churches that they're looking for is a charismatic one. And so that's what they seek out. So I think I'm on time. So what should the church do? Well, here's my spiel, and I'll open up to questions afterwards. I think we as Christians, should we stay silent? Well, considering just some of the things that I've told you, considering immigrants will either join your church or they will make their own, the American church can't stay silent. And as immigrants fill our churches, their needs will rise to the top of your agendas. They will rise to the top of our budgets because they will be the ones who have need. They will be the priority. The Holy Spirit will begin to guide a congregation solely focused on God's work, right? Not our solutions, not our political solutions, but solely focused on God's work. And it may lead us to a more political approach. It may, how can you get involved in immigration reform? How can you help strengthen the security in Mexico? How can you advocate for better laws? That it may lead you there, or it just may lead your congregation into feeding and housing and clothing immigrants in needs, offering ESL classes, finance, for immigrations, helping them with legal counsel, but it will always involve what was back in Leviticus. When a stranger sojourns with you in your land, you shall not do him wrong. You shall treat the stranger who sojourns with you as a native among you, and you shall love him as yourself, because they are yourself. The biggest boom in America was 9 million immigrants who came at the end of the 19th century from Europe that made up most of America. They are us just 100 years earlier. And you shall love him as yourself, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt, and I am the Lord your God. So there's two ways you can look at immigration. You can look from the political side, if that's kind of your bend and what you can do. You can also look at it from the pastoral side as a church. They're our sisters and brothers in Christ, most of them. And where else would they go to find help or find someone who'd be kind to them, someone who will accept them, but their fellow sisters and brothers in Christ? So that is me. Thank you for listening, and hopefully I didn't fire hose you with too much. I try to keep it short because there's so much. And yeah, I'll hand it back to you, Pastor Drake.
Okay. Well, thank you, Sergio. Appreciate what you have shared with us. I'm sure you've raised a number of questions in the minds of those on in this forum, and we're going to ask you to begin to prepare any questions that you might have. I'm going to ask them a couple just to prime the prompt, and then we'll go from there. First, want to do a little basic homework. What nomenclature should we be using these days? Is it Hispanic? Is it Chicano? Is it Latino? Is it help us to understand that, first of all? Something pretty basic, because I'm getting a little confused right now. Kind of like Black, African American, Negro,
Yeah.
soul brother. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, unfortunately, we are making it more confusing. So if I can speak frankly, America's exceptionalism has a very far reach, and a bit of its imperialistic ideas is encroaching on a culture that can't defend itself. So for years, all of Latin America, they were called Latinos because they were all from Latin America. They weren't all Hispanics, because Hispanic means that they were settled by Spain, conquered by Spain. But not all of Latin America was settled by Spain. You have Dominican Republic, who were French, and you have Brazil, who was Portuguese, or the Portugal. So Latino was the safest way to refer to anyone who you didn't know if they were from Mexico or Guatemala or Nicaragua or wherever, to say that would cover all of it. Unfortunately, not unfortunately, we are in the middle of a argument that is backed by the US of Latinx, which is to get away from the gendering of Latin America or the Latin language. As from right now, what I understand, Mexico has not adopted this. Mexico has not adopted trying to ungender its language, because all of its language is gendered. How are you you can't even say that properly in Spanish. And the history of it, I know, was brought from New Yorkers, the Latinos in New York and Costa Rica. And they've been pushing that agenda. And now proper term in America is Latinx. And I'm not popular when I say I don't accept it, because my country has not accepted it. And until that happens, I want to be a voice for them to be like, I understand you want this, but I'm not there yet. So I still go by Latino and Latina, and to just be on the safe side. You're muted, Steve. I can see you're very animated, though.
Thank you. As is, I think, typical, Latina and Latino are gendered.
Right.
So Latino being male and Latina being female.
Yeah, and Latino being the plural of all of, like, oh, they're Latinos, so that refers to male and female. But I myself am a Latino.
I was talking to another. What's going on? Okay. I was talking to another, a couple of Latino sisters, and they made the point that there's no X in Spanish, so therefore it didn't register with them either. So it is America trying to overlay that on the rest of the world.
Yeah, well, no, it's Latinos in America who are fighting for, and the cause is noble. They're fighting for a voice for the LGBT community and all those things. And so they actually tried different things, and they landed on Latino X from my small amount of searching, because it required it represented the X chromosome that both genders have, and so to try to use it that way. But in Spanish, it doesn't work. We would say Latino X, which is strange. Like, come up with a different word, like altogether if you want to.
Okay, so you made a couple points by articulating the fact that there are many immigrants in America coming from a lot of different places. Some are refugees, some are not. You talk about Asia, Africa, etc. Why is Hispanic or Latinos then the issue in America when it comes to immigration? Why does that become the focus? Then a second question I have that I want you to address has to do with, are people upset because some would argue that we have a front door and that there are people who are coming through the back door, and what impact does that have on the conversation? But the first one has to do with, when we talk immigration, why do you think we simply focus on those coming from Latin America versus the rest of the world? And actually, anybody else can respond to that as well.
Yeah, I'd love to hear someone else respond, but I can respond. I think it's because it's what has been politicized among cabinets of the presidencies and in America, and it's the biggest border. It's one of the biggest borders in the world, and so we've had the issue from the beginning of the dawn of the nations, of these two nations. I mean, the Mexican-American War was between US and America, and the disagreement of how things should be done. And talk about immigrants, it was Americans who came into Mexico with slaves to start off with that started that whole thing. So like it's been going back and forth a lot. What we don't talk about is Americans going into Mexico, buying up land and setting up shop and businesses, and Mexico's open arm to them, and what it does to the economy. So I think it's because it's the closest, it's the most amount of people, and it's the labor, it's the low cost of labor that it produces, because it touches so many places, touches a lot of people's wallets, let me put it that way.
One of the references Pastor makes there is this idea of legal and illegal. Respond to that. Do you see it in a broader capacity, or we hear people all the time talk about, I'm okay with immigration, just not illegal?
Yeah, I think so. Culture wise, one thing about, and I'm going to speak, I'm going to speak in broad strokes. So, maybe you don't feel this way, but the overall culture of the U.S. America is America wants to be right. It's more important to be right than to be anything else. We want to do the right thing, say the right thing, do the right thing, be on the right side of things. So anything that's outside of that is really difficult to swallow. If any of you have been in missions and you've tried to go do missions in another country where things are a little more loosey-goosey and you need to pay bribes to get into a certain country or do those things, it just feels not good. We can't do these things, right? Because that our nature is we want to be right. So when it comes to illegal immigration or undocumented immigration, that's already just a hurdle to go over. As for the front door versus the back door, why don't all these Latin Americans use the front door? Why don't they get into the system? Well, just given the sheer numbers of people coming from different countries, they are 10 times larger than them. And that front door only allows so many people in, and it's also very costly. And so America's been part of an economic system that has disadvantaged them for the beginning, from the beginning, going back to the Mexican-American War, where they tried to bring slaves in to Mexico, didn't have to pay their slaves. Mexico had eradicated slavery. They had to pay their workers. So they were at an economic disadvantage, and that has just continued. So now you're asking, somebody who lives in an economy that is not well to try to raise money that they can't survive where they are. How are they now going to raise $10,000 to get into America? So unfortunately, it's a system there.
Would you say generally then perception is that Americans would rather be right than compassionate, or like the church wants to land on the right side of things, not necessarily the compassionate side, or there's compassion, but it needs to be compassion that comes through a right channel? That's what I'm picking up.
Yeah. I mean, and for good reason, right? There's law and order, and we need to, we need to have it. But there's times when the laws and orders that we have keep people down. And if you ever had to go through the process yourself, you would quickly see why people are doing what they're doing. One of the arguments that I had is like, why don't they just do it the right way? I'm like, same reason why everybody who lives in poverty in America, is selling things out their trunk and is doing things. Why don't they just get a real job? Why don't they just go get, a career? Why don't they go to college? Why don't they do something about their situation? It's like, their situation is heavily disadvantaged in some places, that their options are very limited, and they're trying to survive. And unfortunately, that goes against some of our laws and order.
Okay, well, we can begin to open up for other questions. We just want to prime the pump a little bit. So if you have one, you can unmute yourselves. If you want to put something in the chat, Steve will monitor that. But we would love for you to raise your questions. So I guess I want to do a follow-up while people are getting ready. Is it unfair to consider people to say people lack compassion if they feel very strongly that people ought to go through the process that is put in place? Now, granted, I heard what you said about how cumbersome it is, times how expensive it is, the sheer number of people could overwhelm a system. But the fact is, we do have a process. And is it fair to call people, say they lack compassion if they insist that people go through the front door versus the back door? If I can put it that way, I'm just raising questions for us.
I don't think people lack compassion in their heart about that. I think everyone has good intent for the most part. I mean, yeah, there might be some, of course. But no, I wouldn't say we lack compassion. It's just it's a sticky situation. It's a tough situation. It's very much that same situation when King David came to the priest and needed something to eat, and he gave him the showbread. He broke the rules in order to give him that showbread, because there was somebody who was hungry in front of him, and so I don't think we lack that compassion. It's just on such a large scale is how to, that's tough to process, I would say.
Go ahead. Something for the group later. At the end, I'd love for us to answer the question, how do we avoid the political pitfalls as we contemplate and think about immigration? That's something I want us to do. But I want to open the floor up. I see a couple of people have unmuted themselves. Please feel free to posture your question, please.
Yeah, well, I'll jump in. First, Sergio, man, thank you so much for being here and for sharing your perspective with us and educating us, because it's so critical for us as the church to be able to weigh into this in a way that's Christ-centered and with the heart of God.
Mhm.
So I've got probably more questions that I could ask you right now. So I'm gonna say Harvey and I are coming up to Bellevue again.
Let's do it. Do
So I need a seminar, man. So but my one of my first questions is, I was listening to the scripture that you read at the beginning, and my first question is the process unjust?
I would say yes. And it's not necessarily because the process has come after already unjust acts, right? So like we needed a civil rights movement because there was slavery, right?
Right.
We need a process to help immigration because we didn't go about it right to begin with, when
Right.
it came to the two countries. And so it's just it's the domino effect of it, that continues.
Mhm.
And kind of the reason I asked that question is because I think that's kind of where we get stuck as Christians sometimes. Like Harvey was saying, people will say, well, there's process, so people need to go through the process. But if the process is unjust, then the church has a responsibility to be thinking about what would a more just process be. And obviously there's a political side to this. So when we start thinking and giving our input politically, we need to have justice, biblical justice in.
Mhm.
And my second question is, what are some good books or resources that you would recommend for us to use to educate ourselves on in just the background, the immigration issue? You hit some stats there, you gave some history, and it's kind of like, man, give me a library because I
Yeah.
need to saturate myself in this.
Yeah. I would say for just what recent things, I can share that Pew Review and Immigration on the Church is a lot of good stuff there, just to get you in the know of like of recent numbers and things, and it'll kind of open up your eyes to some things. On for like a historical view, I haven't read many books aside from like textbook stuff that I know, which is like part of it. It's not all of it. But one thing to learn, I would say when it comes to learning how to respond for today of what's going on, I really appreciate, and I can give you guys this. Her name is McBean Immigration Law. She's an immigration lawyer in New York, and she's on social media, and she's just dedicated to help immigrants. And she gives these little short videos of like, hey, this new law just passed. This is what it means for you if you're of this group. And she kind of explains these things. And it's helped me a lot because immigration today is so different from when it was when I was younger, and it changes all the time. It's really hard to stay up to date on it. Things that I'm going to say today in a year don't, could be totally different.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Sergio, I really, really appreciate you speaking to us tonight. I have two questions, two thoughts, and forgive me for my ignorance, and you can correct me. I have thick skin. I am here to learn. But I thought I understood you to say that most of the 70% of the immigrants that are coming into this country are Christian. Am I right?
In 2019.
In 2019.
In 2019, among all the refugees.
Among all the refugees. Okay.
Yeah, 4,900 were Muslim and 23,800 were Christians. And per groups, there's different breakouts. So Latinos, it's like 80%. People coming from Africa, it's like 90% of I think it's more. It's like 95% of Africans that come to US are Christian. In Korea, it's pretty high. China, it's those statistics are hard, but yeah, it's per group.
So my question is, I also thought I heard you say that many of those Christians are Pentecostal.
The Pentecostal movement just exploded in the new century, the 21st century. So
Mhm.
many, I mean, in Latin America, the charismatic movement has really exploded. So it's still predominantly Catholic, but the non-Catholics are very much charismatic. The Africans, Pentecostal, charismatic, almost. I don't know what the percentage is, but it's really, really high. As well as I'm pretty sure Korea is that way too. There's this charismatic movement, and I don't have time to go into it, but once you got Christianity out of Europe and you put it in the hands of other cultures who are not the high church, and they just adopted it, well, so many cultures, dance, music, art, movement is just a part of them. So a charismatic movement is just,
So
they're more accustomed
this
to it.
is my question. So you great segue. That's my question. So how do we as the American church attract these people? Because I'm making the assumption that a large percentage of the American church has frowned on Pentecostalism, charismatic, the movement, the dance. We're very, very conservative. Our engagement is sterile. Whereas people that are coming from these countries, they're much more engaging, they're much more open. And so how can we as the American church open up ourselves to learn more to God and more to getting to know people, knowing that to really get to know them, we have to do a lot of transformational work within ourselves because we've been conditioned to be conservative in our mindsets, in
Yeah,
our politics.
I would say when it comes to the major groups, Latin Americans, Africans, which is a bunch of different countries, Congo, Rwanda, everything. And then you get up to Egypt and it's, a bunch of different, and even Chinese, their relational cultures and their collective cultures, especially the Africans. And so attracting them to your church is not necessarily what they're looking for. What they're looking for is who can I be in relationship with? Who am I going to trust to be in community with? And that's the reason why they tend to stick to their affinity groups. Latinos stick to Latinos and Africans stick to Africans, because we as Americans, or the Americans, we're not a collective culture, and we're also not a relational culture. We're a tax-based culture. So relationship is a little harder. So just a small thing for you to know. This came from a Chinese pastor. I didn't realize that when American says, let's do lunch, or we should get coffee sometime, or those things, they don't really mean that.
I know. Yeah.
And I had to learn that, and I got my feelings hurt a lot. And he wrote a letter to his unborn son, which he didn't have at the time. He's like, here's 10 things I need you to know about Americans. And that was one of them. He's like, the way they do relationship, I don't understand, and it's different. And so what I would say is that if there's immigrants around us all the time,
right,
the kindness and hospitality that's in Romans, we can do without any theology or any sort of classes or any other thing. Is build a relationship with them, learn from them, and the trust will come, at that point, to any church, really.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Me?
Yes. Yeah, sorry.
Hi. Yes. It's more of a statement or an observation, but my last years of my teaching, I was up in Linwood at a preschool, a Lutheran preschool. And there is quite the Ethiopian community that has located in the area. And I would say they have a they came to the Lutheran preschool. I was up at Trinity Lutheran, and they knew the reputation of the Lutheran schools. And so
Wow.
that's it. And the community is such that this person then tells this person that tells this person.
Mhm,
Pretty soon, I mean, I had a class of maybe 6 Ethiopian kids out of 12.
mhm,
It was really remarkable. And one of the things that I learned or realized from that is that they have a very high view of the church,
mhm,
and they are not what we would call loosey-goosey, very formal.
mhm.
And in fact, one of the little boys one time in chapel, when the question was about, what do you do in the church when you're going to sing? And this one little boy said, we take our shoes off to walk down the aisle.
Mhm,
I mean, it's
mhm,
revere.
mhm,
And I think sometimes, I mean, in our travels, we have found going to other places, US Americans, at least Western US Americans, tend to be more free-spirited about things. And, you know, we bring in our coffee cups and we do this and that. And you go to other places and no, there's a reverence.
mhm.
And so I'm wondering, for when I stayed a summer down in Panama, and it would not, the Catholics coming from there would not have appreciated a loosey-goosey Catholicism up here.
Mhm.
Is that what you find from the community coming up? And then, of course, I just was wanting to say the Ethiopian community has been very interesting for me, and I've appreciated them greatly.
Mhm.
But on the Catholic side, I would think they'd be rather conservative. Would you find that?
It really depends on what culture they're coming from. So I would say Latin America, because that's my upbringing. I grew up in a Christian Spanish church, and we're very like legalistic, suits and ties, and what would we consider Sundays best, and very reverent and those type of things. But people coming from China, there's not as many Christians. They have no idea of what church is supposed to be. So they don't know what they're doing wrong. And so it's just different cultures. I oversee an African community who are Congolese and Burundi and Tanzanian and Rwandan, and it's different, among them. Most of them, the first generation, definitely very high reverence, not so much the second generation as much. So I would say it depends where they're coming from. Is how they see it, type of things. But I do see more traditional, like culture has heavy traditions, right? American traditions are not as strong. I don't know, strong. They're not as heavy as they used to be, right? The Sweet 16s and the homecoming dance and all the things that were very like American traditions. There's so many people here that it's kind of died down a bit. Other countries are very homogenous, so their traditions are really deep rooted, and so tradition is like really strong in many communities. So whatever tradition that they've made church, it's pretty strong wherever they go.
Sergio, I want to revisit one of the things you said that I think we've seen discussed in this forum a lot, related to kind of wrestling with racism and wrestling with reconciliation in the context with the African American community, is this wrestle around just owning up to the fact that the stuff is broken and has been broken from the beginning. So that the idea that U.S. culture was ever good or godly or the history is we were that idea that we were broken very early, and economics is a part of it, and slavery is a part of it, and at least for kind of white Christians, it's been history of trying to get people to own the fact that the system's been broken, and we want to go back to the good old days, but the good old days were also broken. Kind of it. So it's not just George Floyd that we noticed it was broken. What I heard you say was really a similar, Mexican-American War and the U.S. bringing slaves to Mexico, and you know, like the brokenness was there, and so now we're talking about trying to understand what just immigration is, but we're still not dealing with the fact that we broke it. It was broken from the beginning. Like we took this land from natives, and we just don't own any of our history. We don't own that level of, it was broken from the beginning, and we're making systems to fix what was broke, like to go back to something that was already broken. Like,
Mhm.
I'd like you to expound a little more on that. I was struck by that comparison.
Yeah. You know, we can't change history, but we can honor it. And the uncomfortability that comes with US America is, you know, every country has made mistakes. I mean, every country has blood on their hands. Mexico treats the immigrants coming from South America terribly. The southern border of Mexico, and I've explained this to people, they're worse than America when how they treat the immigrants coming in who are not coming documented, who don't have the money. So Mexico is not innocent either. And so, but I can say that that's my country, that's my people, and that's something that they're doing that I can say is wrong. And I'm okay with that. It's a little more difficult in the US as there's so many things that there's this, you know, a little, like I said, exceptionalism. There's the exceptionalism of America, that we are the best, that America is the best of whatever it is. And it kind of leads to that nationalism. So being able to say that mistakes were made, maybe the history we've learned isn't the entire story, and we still have a part to play in it, is something that we can help. We can't change the past, but we can do something about today. You can pay attention to where sugar's coming from. You can pay attention to you know, the current farm labor laws and how just they are. There are things that we know are part of it, that we can pay attention to and be okay, or I'm saying to be okay with. We didn't start off on a good place. We can make a better one moving forward. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, I think it does. I think, you know, this idea that, you know, sin entered into the world years ago and we've been broken since, you know, so the exceptionalism starts to try to act like at one point we were good and better and right. That right, the concept of right, I think those are just two really challenging cultural nuances that are interesting to hear and to own. And I think they enter into a lot of this discussion that we've had on reconciliation for a couple of years.
Well, we're seeing that in education, right? Like, so I'll get that question as well. At least in this area, right? That the Bellevue district, there's 82 languages spoke in education, and they have all these different nationalities in their schools. And so the students are rising up and asking questions that no one really decided to think about or address. And, you know, when we talk about the war with, you know, Vietnam, and you have 5 Vietnamese students in your class, it's a little different, as it was with me when I was in school and they talked about the Mexican-American War. And I'm like, I think there was more to this than what's in this book. You know, like, so education is having to deal with this on its own. The church has the decision to deal with it if they'd like. Sorry, there was a question down here.
Yeah, I think I saw was Les's hand up.
Yeah, Nicole was too, so I'll defer.
Okay, Nicole and then Les.
Well, okay, thank you, Les. Okay, so Sergio, I am curious, and maybe this is an unfair question, and if it is, then just say so. But when I think about what I know of our immigration system, which is incredibly complex, and to say that it's broken, like it's only like it's broken in so many ways that is part of what creates so much difficulty around it. Are there, when you think about the brokenness of our immigration system, are there like a couple specific ways that like really rise to the top for you? Like, are there this particular issue or these particular couple of issues, which is like, if you ruled the world, you would start here with our immigration system, since there's so many different arenas that need to be addressed?
Yeah, if I were dreaming, would be the economies and how we work together between America and Mexico. They feed off of each other. They make money off of each other, and you know, I chalk it up to sinful greed. And so until we release that or reduce that, really, the immigration is the byproduct of that. It's the economic system that continues that. So you can make any sort of immigration reform you want, and we do. We change the rules constantly. You know, there was no DACA previous to 2006 or 2008. I can't remember.
2008,
you know,
10.
yeah, and so that wasn't even a thing before. Now it is. You know, so like it's a shifting sand. So it's the economy that I don't have really good answers for because I'm not an economist, but I know that that's the root of the problem. That NAFTA was a clear sign of that, and how much it created. So a triple in immigration from Mexico into America, that tripled boom, I'm saying, and I think there's other studies out there saying it's a direct result of NAFTA.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Okay, Les.
Sergio, thank you for everything tonight and the work you're doing. Two comments. One, I've read quite a number of statistics that have, sort of spoken to the Latinos and Latinas in the U.S. who overwhelmingly reject Latinx. So it's, I would just sort of qualify that, yeah, I think there's a portion. I mean, it was just a huge number. And in fact, a Latino at University of Washington wrote a piece for the Seattle Times saying, let's reconsider BIPOC as one of our acronyms, because it is exclusive of so anyway, that's a comment. Related to the question of the failing immigration policies and system, and just trying to look for solutions that aren't only church oriented. Are there any of the Christian relief organizations that are trying to find ways to pour money and legal aid and practical aid to those caught at the border trying to get across? I mean, it's a bad system. You can spend 20 years and maybe change one sentence in the immigration law. But I mean, we've got people stuck at the border. We got families who are trying to come across. Any groups doing anything to really try to get all the resources necessary to help people get across?
So the big, I have not connected myself with any of these organizations. I've seen a lot of their stuff. I've read a lot of their stuff, but I haven't actually had any contact with them. But the organization that continually rises to the top is the Catholic Church and the Jesuit priests. I can't remember what their term is. They're doing a lot of work at the border. They were there outside of when they were being, whatever you call it, caged. I don't know what the nice American term is, but when they were being caged, they were there. They were outside of there. They were doing their best they can to make sure they had enough food and all this kind of stuff, even though they weren't allowed to be, on site. They're doing a lot at the border. And again, because the Catholic Church, a lot of Latinos in the Catholic Church. So as I mentioned, the more that the immigrants, make up of the church, more of these what do you call it? These issues will rise to, like, we need to do something about this because this is our family, this is our people. Like, the church should do something about this. So that's what I would say. I gotta find I'll have to find the one that I keep on coming across. They put out a lot of videos. They're like news down there about what's going on because they're so heavily involved.
Mhm. Now, you mentioned that you came when you were young, and how long did it take you to get your permanent residency?
It took
'Cause
us.
you're a U.S. citizen now yourself, right?
I am not a U.S. citizen.
Mhm.
So I'm the only one in my family who is not a U.S. citizen.
Mhm.
And due to clerical error, that for me to try to get my U.S. citizenship, I decided not to get it because of the Trump era. So it was right before that came up, and there were so many people who were so scared about immigration and all these things that the system, how it is, it had its issues, and it wanted me to renew my green card, which didn't need to be renewed, in order to then apply for naturalization. So they wanted a certain amount of money to get my green card and then turn right around to get naturalized. I'm like, wait a minute, why am I doing this? So I said, forget it, I'll see you in 10 years. And within those 10 years, then the Trump era came up. And I decided to stay a permanent resident in solidarity with my sisters and brothers who are struggling with this. Because I know that if so many of my family was scared. They're like, you're gonna get deported, all the just chatter and politics and media. And I said, look, if you're this scared for me, who's been a permanent resident since 1986, so I have no criminal record, I work for churches, like I have nothing to deport me. If you're scared for me, can you imagine the fear that is in, our people that are in this country? And so I try to be a voice for them to say, like, don't be worried about me. Be worried about your neighbors or somebody else that that might be in this thing, and use that energy to help them. So I am not a permanent resident, or I'm not a citizen, but I am a permanent resident. So it took us 6 years.
6.
Yeah, from 1980. And
80.
the only reason why we got it was because of Reagan's immigration bill.
Mhm.
So without that, who knows how long we would have been in that process. I've talked to immigrants from Haiti who he was in Seattle, and he had already spent $10,000 to illegally immigrate through Mexico, through America, to try to get to Canada, because Canada's immigration policy is a little more friendly. And there's other Haitians that have gone there, and he just needed to make it from Seattle. He was staying in the homeless shelter to try to save money, and he just needed to make it that last 300 miles to get to Canada to freedom. And he was so afraid to, like, gotta get there, and then start the process. Like, I don't know how much money my family has given to this country to get to our green cards, but I don't even know if my parents know. They just, pay for one form, pay for this thing, pay for that thing, pay to get these things, and it just, piles up.
Another question?
Yeah, I have one more. What would you say the most practical, maybe a couple things, whatever comes to your mind, what are some of the most practical things that our churches who don't have Latinos in our community, our church community, how can we bless the Latino community? What are some connecting points that we could be sensitive to? Yeah, I'll just start there.
I mean, the proximity, right, is an issue. So if there's not Latinos in your community now, it's going to be a little bit of the savior complex. Like, how can we come and do something for you? So there might be support of certain organizations that are working in those areas that you could support, and so that's an indirect way. Yeah, because it's, I mean, the problems are very localized, and I would say, and it's hard to say what the problem is in certain areas. Not like, again, 77% of immigrants are legal, so it's not like not all Latinos are struggling and need help. It's those who do and finding those who do.
Yeah, and I guess beyond, kind of, we're going to go help the Latinos. We need the Latino community to flesh out Revelation. Because not just, okay, how can we help you, but there's a spiritual richness in that culture, in that community, that we're called to interact with as the people of God. And so I guess, it's beyond, like you were saying, the savior complex. I mean, there's one passage that comes to my mind in terms of, oh, no man anything but a debt of love. And when you were talking about earlier about, we can't change the past, but, for example, my house used to be Native American land to the Puyallup tribe. And, I didn't have anything to do with that directly, but I'm benefiting from it. Okay, so one of the questions I asked myself is, okay, what debt of love do I owe to the Native American people in this region? And I'm thinking about the same thing. I mean, it's just been in the last few years I really read about the Mexican-American War, what that was about. And it was a jaw dropper for me, because I realized, oh, we were wrong. I mean, and I'm thinking like, oh my goodness, and so I guess my question more is, as the church building relationships across racial lines. I mean, that's kind of what Harvey and I are doing in terms of racial reconciliation. But yeah, just, because the Latino community is not my community, there are things I need to learn, things I need to know, and, could use some coaching in relationship building, serving, not kind of as a savior, serving as your brother. Just to, we need to be in relationship with each other.
Yeah. Two things come to mind, but I don't really have, because I've never been presented with this question, so I'm thinking off the top of my head.
That's okay. That's all right.
I would say
I'm coming to Bellevue.
There we go. So I would say on a very big scale, dual language schools is a big benefit to the community. Why we don't have Spanish and English as the main languages in the U.S. of America? It is in California, not by process, but by just sheer numbers alone. Is something that can be looked into. I know it's like a cool thing to have for schools now. A lot of people want to get their kids into Spanish, but as you get kids into Spanish, as they interact with the Latino community, there is a benefit to them there. So that's one thing that I think could be done anywhere, and is done in places where there is so many, dual language or Latinos. I would say the other thing, there's organizations here in Seattle that and on the east side now too. There's Centro La Raza that's up there at the top of Beacon Hill. My aunt worked there; she was a caseworker there. I grew up there. I was breakdancing out in the basketball court back in the '80s there with my brother and my cousins. That's been a place that a lot of Latinos trust It's built its trust in the community for decades. And there may be some partnering with them that could be done. On the east side, there's this place called El Centro de Mexico, and it's essentially starting up like Centro La Raza, to help Latinos who, filling out rental forms, understanding how to fill out doctor forms, just helping them, navigate the American system. So those are the things off the top of my head.
I was also thinking, I'm sorry, I cut you
Go.
off.
Oh, I was going to say supporting taco trucks. I mean, that's an easy way. Come on now.
Now, be practical, be practical.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Those people are making a business, and that's the restaurant. I mean, I don't want to get crazy, but we own the restaurant business here. Your Chinese food is made by Latinos. Every food in the world is made by Latinos. So that's a way to help them.
All right, that's good.
Talking about partnering, but I was just thinking about pastors and leaders partnering with other pastors, Latino pastors, Ethiopian pastors, just develop leaders, pastoral leaders, developing relationships and getting to and having those conversations and going deep with one another. And maybe that can be a place where corporately, as churches, we can start developing relationships and seeing how we can do more together to help one another.
Yes, what I would like to say when it comes to churches in America, in the United States of America, the front door, especially for Latino churches, but the front door for these immigrant churches, meaning first generation, non-English speaking churches, is huge. The Latino church is growing exponentially. The Chinese church is growing exponentially, but the back door is just as big. The second generation do not tend to stay in the church because their church is being run by first generation. They want to keep their culture from where they came. And the second generation is not really being ministered to. Their parents, these first generations, don't understand their problems. And that's really where the American churches come together. That's what we're doing at Bel Pres best we can. We have an African community in our church, and we're trying to get, we're working to have the youth together. That's how I grew up. I grew up in a Latino church that was in the fellowship hall of a predominantly Caucasian church. So there's a Spanish speaking service and an English speaking service, but as kids, we were together. That got me into the church life in America. And so I would say if there's something as pastors, whatever community is around you, whatever non-English speaking communities around you, go talk with them. How can we work together? How's your second generations doing? I'm pretty sure all those pastors will have similar commentary on the struggles between their first and the second generation within their churches.
Okay, we are down to our last 5 minutes. Is there another question from anybody else before we pray and wrap this up?
Yes, Gene.
I have a short one. I really appreciate all the information and insights. I've heard you a few times refer to U.S. America. And I'm wondering if that's an intentional thing or just a phrase that you use. And can you tell me about that?
Yeah. So back to the, when we say America, we're like, oh, I'm from America. I'm like, which part? South America, Central, Mexico, Canada? Oh, no. You mean the real America? You mean U.S. America? So yes, I say that a lot intentionally. Just as, again, it's kind of that, I don't know what imperialism is the best way to say it. That Canada's America too. So I say U.S. Americans. I try to say majority culture for delineating people in the U.S. America and stuff. So yeah.
at least the Latinos as a whole are probably taking over most of the cities as dominant culture or largest culture.
Yeah, 2050, the dominant culture will no longer be Caucasian in US. Speaking about immigrants, they have twice as many more kids as US Americans do. That keeps on dropping. Once the US Americans drop between having more than 2 kids, that's, a sign for not being majority anymore, which is happening now.
Well, thank you again, Brother Sergio, for giving us part of your heart and your life tonight, man. We appreciate that.
Yes, thank you.
We really do. A lot of good insights, things we haven't delved into tonight around the kind of economy. But again, I want us to leave musing on the question, how do we avoid the politics of immigration as we think about what does it really mean to love it as the people of God, as we love on others. So let's continue to pray. Let's continue to stand for what we know is right from the scripture. Excuse me. And then let's continue to look for ways that we can partner with our brothers and sisters who are living constantly kind of under threat. I just got a thought about, we have a couple of Hispanic or Latin churches here in our own denomination. I'm thinking, okay, I need to reach out to some of them to figure out what we can do to encourage them in this journey. So let's continue to be prayerful, continue to be wise, right? Continue to be safe. But let's continue to ask God to show us how he can use our hands to make this world what he wants it to be. So God bless each and every one of you. Thank you again for joining us. And this recording, I think, will be on our somewhere later if you wanted to go back and review it. Is that right, Barry?
Yeah, it'll be our YouTube channel, Urban Impact SEA.
YouTube channel, Urban Impact SEA. All right. God bless you all. Good night. Rest well, and enjoy your Thanksgiving.